Welcome, I'm Martina, your trusty guide through the pages of Camp Half-Blood and beyond. Grab your camp shirts, ready your weapons, and let's embark on this epic adventure together. This is Delphi Dispatches. Before we dive into the news part today, I wanted to mention that Delphi Dispatches is soon going to be available on Amazon Music, Audible, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and etc. So keep an eye out on my socials for updates when that will be. I'm currently working on it. And also, quick reminder, this episode will contain spoilers for the first 2 episodes of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and possibly some future things in the predictions part. Before we get into the episodes themselves, let's dive into the news part. We're gonna pick right after we left our last episode from the 16th of December. Here we got a video on the Percy Jackson Instagram and TikTok accounts where they surprised a youth librarian with tickets to the world premiere and a personal video from the trio, and it was really sweet, so I highly recommend you to check it out there. We also had a lot of interviews, which is totally normal for this time, but one of my favorites was when the trio played Heads Up with Liam Crowley from comicbook.com. It is very funny and worth a watch. Also on the 16th was the UK premiere, but for this one there was not that much things online like for the world premiere in New York. I looked on Getty Images and websites like this for pictures, and all I can say is they look really nice. Not as nice as they looked at the Met. It was more casual, I would say, in London. And for the trio, Ariane rocked a white turtleneck. I love it. Walker, blue again, of course, sticking to the Percy brand. And Leah had this really pretty flowery dress. I also really enjoy this. And Rick and Becky, as always, matching, nice, cozy. You can't say anything bad about those two. Then on the 17th, we had a video on the Percy series socials saying 3 days until Percy Jackson comes out. It was a lot of Percy and Sally shots and also a few shots of the Minotaur. Now moving on to the 18th of December. It's 2 days until the release of the first episode, and we got 3 Insta Reels highlighting our trio. I'm just gonna talk quick about what they featured in each of those reels. The first one is Annabeth. We have her in her armor, in a fighting stance. We hear Luke saying Annabeth sees the world differently, always 6 steps ahead of everyone else. We also see the invisibility cap in action. And we hear her say to Percy, I've been waiting to see if something like this would happen. And it looks like it's right after the bathroom scene. And we also see her helping him up at the beach. Then for Grover, there's this really cute line. He's saying, I'm Grover. I'm your best friend. Like, hello, who do you think I am? That's in the car with Percy and Sally. And Percy asking him, what are you? And Grover says, I'm your protector. My heart skipped when he said that. And we get the iconic, the important thing is not to panic line as well. I think that's gonna be one of my new favorite lines. And for Percy, we also have him in his armor, in a fighting stance, and the iconic, my name is Percy Jackson, am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. We see the mat, we see Nancy being pushed, shoved, pulled into the fountain. We hear Grover yelling no, and also we see the Fury Electo, and we hear her say, it was only a matter of time before we found you, and she's in full-on Fury mode. We also get Sally telling Percy that he's a half-blood and not safe in the world. We have the Minotaur, the Fury, and we get a glimpse of Percy being dunked into a toilet, or at least people trying to dunk him in a toilet, and also a few frames of Capture the Flag. There was also one of the advanced public screenings in Boston, and since Rick and Becky live in Boston, they surprised the fans there, which was really nice. Now, on to the 19th. 1 day before the Percy Jackson series premieres. We get on the Disney Plus YouTube channel behind the scenes video. It's about 2.5 minutes long. It's Rick telling us that the story started out as a bedtime story for his son who is struggling with dyslexia and ADHD, that he had a terrible time at school and the only thing he loved was Greek mythology. And when Rick ran out of old stuff to tell him, he just made up his own story. And that's how Percy was born. We see Percy fighting the Chimera, Clarice, and the Minotaur. We see him in the attic and him confronting the Oracle. And there is this really cool, I think it's almost like a voice crack, him saying, "Hi, nice to meet you." Like to the Oracle, it's Percy humor, we love it. We have Walker talking about Percy and the underwater shots and fighting scenes on the beach. We also get a scene of Sally entrusting Percy to Grover for his protection. Ariane is talking about Grover being a satyr. And we get also a few new Grover shots and shots of the trio. And then we see Annabeth again right after the bathroom scene. And Leah talking about Annabeth and her being the daughter of Athena and also being the leader that she is. We get even more trio shots, and then we get like a categorization of the trio, I think by Ariane. I can totally agree with this. Percy is the hero, Annabeth is the brains, and Grover is the soul. For Percy being the hero, I think it's more on the fighting side of being hero, because essentially they're all heroes. And Grover being the soul, not to get ahead of myself, but after watching the first 2 episodes, I can totally agree with this. We also get the showrunners Dan and John talking about what the story is and what it means. And in the end we get Percy in the infirmary, him meeting Luke in the Hermes cabin, and also leaving camp. And before we cut away, we get a shot of small Percy on a roof. And there's so much more. Could be that I missed some things, so check that out. Oh, we also get a behind-the-scenes video from The Hollywood Reporter. We see Mrs. Dodds being dusted away. And we hear Walker telling us about how we started reading Percy Jackson. We see camp, we see Annabeth. And then we get behind-the-scenes shots, how they filmed the Met. We see storyboard pictures, behind-the-scenes of camp, Capture the Flag, how they made the statues for Auntie M's or Waterland. And then Rick talks about updating the story, that he looked at it again with fresh eyes and wanted to make it speak to all kids, that they could see themselves in the story. We also got another video on Instagram about where it says tomorrow Percy will stream, and we got a few camp shots. Then there was also a video by MTV for the series Music to Blank To. So they were asked a few questions having to do with music. A few of the questions were, what would their characters listen to, or what are you listening to? Walker said Riptide, of course, for Percy. Leah said Mary J. Blige for Annabeth, and Ariane said Jeff Buckley for Grover. Then they were asked which songs remind them of each other. Walker said the song Creep by Radiohead reminds him of Ariane. And Ariane said Break Stuff by Limp Bizkit reminds him of Walker. So we see a friendship there. And music that reminds him of filming was actually the Rocky soundtrack, especially the boys were happy with that. And a go-to karaoke song for Walker is Come Sail Away by Styx. And then it was midnight where I was, and I just checked news online before I went to sleep. And we got teased by Becky and by so many other people online that they might release the episodes earlier than planned. And I was yeah, maybe 1 or 2 hours. So I woke up 1 or 2 hours earlier than I had planned. Or actually, I woke up at a normal time instead of sleeping in, because they would have streamed at 9 a.m. here. So when I woke up at 7, they were already out. Yay! So they changed the release time. Instead of Wednesdays at midnight Eastern Standard Time, they will release on Tuesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is around 2 or 3 a.m. in Europe, depending on where you are. So every time I wake up on Wednesdays, I'm gonna have a new episode to watch. I'm not gonna wake up at 3 a.m. even though I like these things a lot. I can't do this over more than 1 month, especially if I have to work. And also on 19th, this is the last news from the 19th, there was a screening in LA, and a lot of the actors surprised those people going to this screening. I think it was the trio and Dior and Charlie. I think those 5 surprised them. I don't have a lot of news from the 20th because there was so much that probably things got lost. But one of my favorite things was that the Empire State Building was lit up blue in honor of Percy. And I also saw like a lot of sponsored content over on TikTok. I saw a person making cookies or candles to the Percy Jackson theme. And it was like not just fan-made, it was really sponsored, so it was classified as an ad. Which means Disney knows what they're doing, knows that they have a good thing on their hands if they're paying like small creators to make things like this. Now, before we get into the episodes themselves, let's look at our ratings. As of this moment, which is 1 p.m. on the 21st of December, the Rotten Tomatoes score, Percy Jackson and the Olympians series, has the 96% average on the tomato meter and is certified fresh with 46 reviews, 44 of them being fresh and 2 being rotten, and it has an audience score of 91% with over 500 ratings. The average rating is a 4.6 out of 5 stars. And you best believe me, I gave it 5 stars. This was the only reason I made an account for Rotten Tomatoes. So, oh yeah, and I also said certified fresh for the tomato meter. If you're not familiar with Rotten Tomatoes, the certified fresh status is a special distinction awarded to the best reviewed movies and TV shows. And in order to qualify, movies and TV shows must have like a few requirements, and the most important ones that apply to this one is a consistent tomato meter score of 75% or higher, which we have, and at least 5 reviews from top critics, which we have. So yay. And mind you, it's only been out like a day and a half or something, so we're very happy about the current score. But now, that's enough for news at the moment. Let's dive in with some Demigod discussions and talk about the first 2 episodes of Percy Jackson and the Olympians season 1. Let me tell you like how my viewing experience was. I woke up at 7. I had my settings set up the night before, so my podcasts, and I prepared my camera for like a few highlight reels of my first genuine reaction. I'm maybe going to upload them on Instagram when I have time to edit, so keep an eye on that. So I just sat down, put on my Camp Half-Blood shirt, my Camp Half-Blood necklace, and my jean jacket, which I use for my cosplay. I did not find any blue candy, but I had blue food dye, so I dyed a Sprite that I had blue, so I guess that counts. But I didn't drink much of it because, like I said, it was 7 a.m. But how I watched it, I set up everything and I watched the first episode and let my microphone just run and my camera just run next to me. And after I watched the first episode, I rewatched the first episode and took notes, which I'm going to be reading from now. And then I repeated this with the second one. And at the end, I made some predictions. The first episode, named I Accidentally Vaporized My Pre-Algebra Teacher, was about 37 minutes long, give or take the credits. We start out with Percy in the rain. It's dark, it's ominous. We have the iconic opening monologue from the book. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. This had me like, oh my god, we're starting off strong. Then we get the title card, and we still got a voiceover from Percy, but it's just like for the first few minutes. We get Percy's backstories. We see him in school when he was, I think they said 2nd grade. We see a teacher running through the halls and up some stairs. And then we see small Percy on a roof seeing something. And like the teacher came and got him back down. And this scene reminded me of the following quote, "Hey, don't walk on my roof." But after Percy and the teacher leave, we see a black Pegasus. Maybe a certain blackjack we might know or get to know. Then we see Percy in front of either a therapist or guidance counselor. I'm pretty sure it's a guidance counselor, telling him that it is in his imagination. Then we get Percy at a new school, and he looks out the window and we see like automaton rhinoceros, but like in the next second it's suddenly a garbage truck. and bullies thinking Percy is weird because he sees things. And we also see Percy drawing in his book, which at least I can remember that he draws. But this automaton rhinoceros was the first sketch in his book, and then it like shifts and there are suddenly more sketches and drawings. And then someone lays a mytho-magic card on top of it. Suddenly everything gets brighter and we meet Grover. Grover and Percy are like the outsiders that no one wants to be friends with, I guess. And they get bullied a lot, like by Nancy, who, when walking by Grover, just slams him in the face with her backpack. And Grover is like, no, don't worry, don't stand up to bullies. And after that, we go on a school trip to the Met. Yes, to the Met. This is one of the most iconic parts of this series, and it's this early, so it's just chills. We get a lot of stills of statues, and in the background we hear Mr. Brunner. Yes, I call him Mr. Brunner. You see why later. Telling us the story behind these statues and that they're a reminder of what we are capable of. Then we see Percy looking at his assignment sheet and the letters are kind of shifting and you can't really read what's being written, so that's his dyslexia visualized. We also see the only thing that's like not shifting is his own name that he wrote himself, which doesn't fit in the box, which is so relatable. As someone who has a really long ass name, like first name and last name combined, I always have to write either the first name above and the second name under it, or like bend my last name so it fits in the box because I didn't want to write outside the box. And there's one statue we more or less focus on the most. It's Perseus with the head of Medusa. This is also where we get a flashback of Sally and little Percy in front of the same statue, and Percy asking Sally why he's named after him. We also get this really nice little speech from Sally. I'm just gonna quote it. Not everyone who looks like a hero is a hero, and not everyone who looks like a monster is a monster, which is such a powerful message, and like we should tell this to all the kids. Every kid should know this. Even if maybe we don't have real life monsters as Percy does, monsters can be anything. Sally also tells Percy about the story of Perseus and his mother. And here we have another quote. Hold fast, Perseus. Brave the storm that was meant to break us, for we are unbreakable as long as we have each other. She also tells him that Perseus was one of the few heroes that actually had a happy ending. And when Percy snaps out of this flashback, we saw this little clip in, I think it was released as like a standalone clip, but it's the one where he's like, Mom, and Nancy is like being a typical bully, and he's like, oh no, sweetie, I'm here, things like that, you know, and Mrs. Dodds reprimanding him for no reason at all, but at least Mr. Brunner steps in and says he believes in Percy and gives him a new pen since he broke his other one, and says that the pen is a mighty instrument. After that we get a lunch break, and here we see how great Grover and Percy's friendship is. Because while Grover is trying to justify Nancy's bullying with, there could be multiple reasons for a bully to act out, things like that, without any thought behind it, they just swap lunch meats, so Percy gets the double meat, like the meat from Grover's lunch, and Grover gets the cheese from Percy's lunch, because as the readers of the book know, Grover is a vegetarian. Which begs the question, if they get packed lunches from school, why doesn't the school accommodate vegetarianism? Like they would hopefully accommodate allergies. Why not other dietary restrictions or other lifestyles? I don't know. What if he was vegan or someone was vegan? While this all is happening, Percy wants to stand up against Nancy, but Grover shoots him down, saying if there's one thing he knows, you should never stand up to a bully. Which, kids, stand up to your bullies. Find creative ways to do so, not with violence, but don't let them get to you. And in that exact moment, Grover gets hit by a flying cheese from none other than Nancy, of course, our head bully. And this is when Percy snaps. He stands up, marches over to Nancy and wants to push her. But before he can even touch her, she kind of flies, kind of gets pulled into the fountain already, where she's like, Percy pushed me. I'm like, yeah, that's what you get for being a bully. But Percy's like, what the frick happened? I didn't even touch her. And there is this metallic noise sound thing that starts in the background, which gave me the vibe of Spidey sense. Like, he knows something is off, but he can't really tell what. We also see that his pen is starting to vibrate. Interesting. What could that be? And suddenly we hear Mrs. Dodds, but she's not talking. At least we can see her talking, but we hear her in Percy's mind probably. She's like staring him down and coming towards him, and as she walks, her leather jacket like moves and folds out into wings, and she herself becomes a monster, in specific a fury. I'm telling you, this was such a cool transition, like the long leather jacket just moving in front of her, and no one sees her for like what she is. No one's paying attention. They're like looking at Nancy. Only Percy can see this, and he's like, what is going on? He's so confused, and she basically jumps him, like she flies on him, and Percy lands on the ground, and she, with her claws, tries to claw at him, but before she can really do anything, she starts to vaporize, as the title of this episode suggests. Somehow, she got vaporized by Percy, like accidentally. But before she's gone, she's repeatedly asking Percy, where is it, Half-Blood? Which just adds to Percy's confusion. But after she's dusted away a la Endgame, Percy is still on the ground and is like waking up. Grover and the other students are all like watching him from top down. And Mr. Runner is coming up and telling them to step back. He just needs some space. And Percy's like, what just happened? Did you see that? Where is Mrs. Dodds? Grover and Mr. Runner are so confused. Like, what are you talking about? There's no one named Mrs. Dodds here. And we also see Nancy, totally wet, being cared for, I guess, by another teacher who's like, we've not seen her before. Where did she come from? And after this, we cut back to the school. There, Percy and Grover are in the principal's office. We're seeing this from like behind the boys, so we could be in their place from this angle. In the middle, there is the principal. On the right side of the screen, we see Mr. Brunner. And if you look closely, there's also someone on the left. And who is this person? It's Rick. It's Uncle Rick. It's the author, Rick Riordan. We got his cameo in the first episode. I was thinking, I don't know when he would show up. Maybe in the casino, maybe as a statue in RTMs, something like that. But no, he shows up in the first episode, in the first half of the first episode. And just sitting there, like really, I wouldn't say awkward, like stiff, just sitting there. He has no dialogue whatsoever. And speaking of dialogue, I love the principal. He's like, do you have anything else to say for your defense except, and he turns the page and looks at the sheet he has, I didn't push Nancy. And Percy's like really confused. I'm like, I didn't push Nancy. I'm like, what else should he say? He's telling the truth. But then the principal asks Grover if he wants to add something. And instead of coming to his aid, Grover blatantly throws Percy under the bus. He's telling the principal Percy talked about getting revenge on Nancy and that he saw him push Nancy into the fountain. So just a blatant lie. Betrayal from your best friend. Your only friend, might I say. So how would you feel? Percy, of course, being distraught, gets expelled from Yancey Academy. The next shot, we see him just sitting on a bench with his things, which are not a lot, where I was like, is it just like you get home on the weekends kind of school? It's not enough things to be a like whole ass boarding school, and I speak from experience since I was in a boarding school for 3 years. And before he can leave, Mr. Brunner comes up and tells Percy that he believes him, or at least he believes him that he didn't push Nancy. Nancy, or at least that he thinks he didn't push Nancy. And then he gets a ride home in this like old beat up car with Yancey Academy on the side. When they drive away, we see that Yancey Academy is fancy. Then we're going back to New York. And then I thought, if it would be a happy return home, we could play Welcome to New York by Taylor Swift. And as we know, Rick and Becky are Swifties, or at least know enough of her to reference her throughout books and blog posts. Oh yes, if you didn't know, Taylor Swift is canonically mentioned in one book of Rick Riordan. It's not directly a Percy Jackson book, it's the second or third, or it's one of the Magnus Chase books, but it's just like an offhanded comment. And Percy is just walking up to the apartment door when someone comes out. We found out that it's Eddie the Super, who's repaired the plumbing apparently, and he's actually nice to Percy, saying, while Percy apologizes for the other voice we heard arguing with Eddie, which we'll find out later is Gabe, saying, I'm sorry about that. And Eddie just replies, I'm leaving, you're coming home, I should be sorry for you. Which is like, yes, Eddie, you said it. You said it. We all should be sorry for Percy Jackson. And then we meet Gabe. Smelly Gabe Ugliano. Yes, I know his name is Ugliano, but we will refer to him as either Smelly Gabe or Ugliano. Gabe Ugliano. I prefer Smelly Gabe, it's funnier. Then we find out Gabe picked up Sally's phone when the principal called, explaining that Percy was expelled, which is like a big no-no. You are not picking up Sally's phone. No, Percy is the same thing. And then we have a little back and forth. Unfortunately, Smelly Gabe is kind of funny, which I don't like, because we're supposed to hate him. And I mean, I still hate him, but he's kind of funny, isn't he? And there's also one thing where Gabe says something like, as long as you live under my roof, you abide by my laws. And then Percy replies, your roof? My mother is the only one employed under this roof. I'm like, yes. Sally being the breadwinner of this family makes so much sense. And Gabe just being an online poker player and probably being horrible at it also makes so much sense. And then we meet Sally, or Queen Sally Jackson. If you haven't noticed, not only me, but even the whole fandom, we stan Sally Jackson because she is the best mother ever. In literature, film, TV, ever. We love Sally Jackson, and she needs to protect it at all costs. And especially when we pan out to her sitting on the balcony. First I thought it was a fire escape, but there was furniture out there, and I think you cannot have furniture on a fire escape. That would defeat the purpose of a fire escape. She is sitting in the rain, not singing in the rain, sitting in the rain, and listening to Olivia Rodrigo. At least it's the song in the background. I don't know if she's like actively listening to her, but it would fit if she's also listening to her. And as a person not too familiar with Olivia Rodrigo, except of course that she was on Disney and her songs like Driver's License, Vampire, things like that. See, I can remember another song. I'm probably gonna remember another song as soon as I finish recording. Oh yeah, I remember one other song. Logical, because that's the song that's playing here. And we also know from like interviews and some tweet from her, Olivia Rodrigo is a Percy Jackson fan, and when she was smaller, wrote Percy Jackson songs. So please, Olivia, release those songs. It doesn't matter if they're bad. The Percy Jackson fandom will love them, will eat them up. Back to Sally. She notices that Percy's home. She comes in, hugs him. She's very happy that he's home, dries off her hair with a towel, and gives him blue candy as a welcome home present, because we all know Percy and Sally's like inside joke is blue candy or blue food in general. She also said, apart from the principal, Mr. Brunner called. Yes, she said Mr. Brunner. I'm like, what did you just say? It is written Brunner. Brunner. How? And it's like, everyone says it like this in the series. We get Percy later saying Mr. Brunner. No, that's like, I think one of the only things I don't agree with this series. But let's move on. Percy starts opening up to Sally, saying he saw something. And this is when Sally kind of panics. And just while Percy is opening up to her, she yells, Gabe! And Gabe comes to them into the probably living room or wherever they are and asks like, what do you want from me? How am I supposed to earn money if you're always wanting something from me? And I'm like, yeah, sure you're winning, and sure she's always wanting something from you. But Sally says they're taking the car to Montauk. As far as I know from the books and also from a little bit of research, Montauk is like this town community on Long Island, mostly for like vacationing, and that's where what they're doing. They're going to the cabin to Montauk, and she's gonna have the car back by Sunday morning. And then Gabe is like, okay, and why am I okay with this? I'm like, why are you funny? Why are you funny? I don't like it. Why are you funny? And Sally says that on the way back, she will pick up sandwiches at D'Angelo's and they can watch the basketball game together. And if not, she's eating the sandwiches alone and listening to the game on the radio. As a non-sports person, I'm like, okay, you would not have won me over, but I know people who love sports, and I could see this argument winning. Then they have a little bit of discussion about the sandwich having peppers on them. And Sally's like, not if you ask like that. And then Gabe said please after a while. And we know Sally can stand up for herself. One thing also about the scene I want to mention, the restaurant name, D'Angelo's. I know that especially in New York and New Jersey and the surrounding states, there are a lot of Italian immigrants, and D'Angelo is a really common name, so it could be literally anybody, but if you know the books, we will get a character in the future with the last name D'Angelo, who has probably nothing to do with this sandwich spot in particular, but it's a really nice, subtle Easter egg for the book fans. And then they go off to Montauk before the storm is getting worse. Then we get a scene of Percy on the beach in the rain looking out on the ocean. And out on the ocean we see a light. At first I thought it was a lighthouse, but it didn't turn around like lighthouses normally do. It was stationary. And then we heard a voice saying, "Who are you? Weak, scared, sad, run away." And then we find out it was only just a dream, like Christina Grimmie would say. Percy is still sitting in the car, and they've actually arrived. We pan over through the front window where we see the cabin to Percy's left, where we see Sally wiping away tears, so she's been crying, which is doubly heartbreaking. And they race each other to the cabin. They're saying on 3, Percy already runs on 2, like typical kid shenanigans. And after freshening up a bit, they come together in the kitchen / living room. It's kind of like a candlelit dinner. They have normal light, but also a few candles standing out. It was really cute. And Sally's saying she found the marshmallows that don't burn that easily. And Percy was like, I don't think it's the marshmallows' fault that we're not paying attention, which I think is like a hint at his ADHD. Then they're sitting on the sofa, and Percy is opening up a bit more to Sally and telling her that he saw something. Sally just straight up asks him, "What did she say to you?" Which totally confuses Percy. How did she know it was a she? And this is when Sally gave herself away. Rather than elaborating on how she knew it was a she asks Percy if he knows why they come to this cabin. And here we get fun Percy stuff again, because it's near the septic tank and it's cheaper. Which is a valid reason, because cabins are freaking expensive. But Sally tells him that it's actually the place where she met his father, and that he was a god. And here, I love this next part. I'm gonna just quote it. It's Percy to Sally. "You fell in love with God? Like Jesus?" She was like, no, Percy, no, not like Jesus. And Sally's like, no, not God, a god. And she tells him that the stories about Greek gods and heroes and monsters are all real, and that he's a half-blood, and that he's not safe. And this is when Percy gets angry. He insists on no, you don't understand, there's something wrong with me, don't try to explain it away with some fantasy nonsense. And this is also the moment where someone knocks on the door. Oh no, who could it be? It's Grover! Yes, our favorite friend who betrayed him. And this is also Percy's reaction, what is he doing here? I don't want to see him. Sally lets Grover in, reluctantly saying he's early and that she was promised the night with Percy, on which Percy is like, what do you mean, promised the night? And Grover just comes in. Percy notices something, although Grover is just talking through that there's been a problem and they have to move, and the important thing is not to panic. And Percy is kind of panicking the whole time, saying, Grover, why is there half a goat in your pants? Also one of my favorite lines. There's so many good lines in this. Alone in the first episode, so many good lines. And they're gonna continue this conversation in the car as they're leaving. In the car, Grover explains that he was meant to guide him and be a support system. And Percy is asking Grover who he is. He's like, I'm Grover. I'm your best friend. Like nothing ever happened between the two of them. And then he's like, no, what are you? And here we get to know that Grover is a satyr and is Percy's protector. And that he's actually 24. Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna be explained later in the series. And Grover also apologizes that he didn't sense the danger, because he's supposed to sense the danger, but no one saw Mrs. Dodds coming. The mist wasn't supposed to cover it up and hide it from him. And this is also where we get an explanation on what the mist is. It is the veil between the worlds that covers up the magical and mythical side of the world from mortal eyes, like Grover's legs, or his horns, or Mrs. Dodds, or her absence in that matter. And he says that they're gonna go to camp, which is a sanctuary for demigods, and he's also confused why Sally has not told him that yet. But like she said, Grover, you're early. Then we get a lightning bolt striking the road behind them, and the Minotaur appears. Yes, the Minotaur. And actually, he looks exactly like on the Mythomagic cards that Grover and Percy play with, because Mythomagic cards are training for the demigods. And yes, he looks exactly like it, and by that I mean he wears underwear, like just underwear. But yeah, the Minotaur is charging towards them and rams in the side of the car, breaking the driver's side window and like getting one of his horns caught in the steering wheel, which causes Sally and the boys to almost run into another car coming from the other side. Sally manages to like weave out of this situation, but they still end up crashing and landing in a ditch. Here is when goat legs save the day. Grover just kicks out the back window of the car, and he and Percy are escaping that way, and they're helping Sally out from the driver's side. Fortunately, none of them are hurt, or at least not that we could see it at that moment. They see the border to camp. There's this lonely pine tree on a ridge, and Grover says Percy will be safe on the other side. And this is where Percy finds out that Sally cannot come, because she's immortal. Only mythical creatures, like demigods and satyrs, can cross over into camp. And this is where Sally entrusts Grover with Percy's safety. He makes him swear that he will protect him from anyone that will hurt or even look funny at Percy. He swears it. He just says, I swear. If this swear itself has a certain implication, we will find out soon, hopefully. And then she says goodbye to Percy. And this is another quote I have. It's, you're gonna need to be brave now. Remember the stories. You are not broken. You are a miracle. You are my son. Hold fast. Brave the storm. Which is, first of all, a great callback to the thing she said to little Percy, and second of all, in the dark. They're only lit by the headlights of the crashed car. It is pouring rain, and she's holding her little son in her hands, and knowing that they must part ways for an unknown amount of time. Forever, for a week, for 2 hours, I don't know. And she doesn't know either. Then she takes Percy's red rain jacket he has on, and they need to split up so the Minotaur can track 2 different demigod scents. While Grover and Percy are running towards the border, Sally is waving the red jacket to disorient the bull, and then the bull charges at Sally. The first few times she manages to dodge them, but I think the third time she slips, and that's when the Minotaur gets a hold of her and squeezes her. And suddenly, she dusts away like we saw earlier with the Mrs. Dodds. It's a little bit different, because in Mrs. Dodds it was just like dust. In her case, it's gold dust, I guess. So, Sally is gone. She's just gone. And we're shocked the same way as Percy is shocked. And this is when I think his instincts take over. He takes out the pen he still got from Mr. Brunner, uncaps it, and the pen turns into a sword. The sword illuminates his face and he charges towards the Minotaur. The first time he doesn't really hit him, they're skidding along, but then Percy gets hit and loses the sword. On his way, crawling towards the sword to grip it again, the gold glow of the sword disappears and the Minotaur hurls up this freaking huge boulder and tries to smash Percy to bits. Percy is really narrowly avoiding this, rolling away from the boulder, and somehow manages to snag the Minotaur's horn on some foliage. And while his head is somewhat down, Percy jumps on his back and rides it like one of those electric bulls in like rodeo bull things. And he sees that the horn that got snagged has like a cut in it, is a bit nicked. So Percy pulls on this horn, rips it off with his bare strength, and rams it back with the pointy end into the Minotaur's head. And that's how the Minotaur also dissolves, and Percy falling down into the collapsing Minotaur, and himself basically collapsing. The last things we hear in this episode are voices. A girl is saying, "He must be the one." And then we see a centaur saying, "Welcome to camp. We've been expecting you." And then the credits roll. Speaking of the credits, the credit art is so beautiful. It's like this art deco. It's inspired by the lobby in the Empire State Building, which I did not know since I've never been to the Empire State Building. But from a few like pictures I saw like from the promo they did with the Percy series did with the Empire State Building, I saw it and it like maps out a lot of adventures our demigods will go on this season. And it's like really nice. And the sound in background is really good, and it reminds me of like the new Marvel series also have these cool end credits, and we see also a lot of the gods depicted, and there's like one frame where we see all the gods except Poseidon, and there's one additional god which is very likely to be Athena. For this I have like a theory coming in at the end. After the like main credits we get a sneak peek to what's on the next episode. I'm gonna take a quick break and then we'll be right back with episode 2. Okay, I'm back. I noticed that there was construction going on in the staircase of my apartment building, so if there's any noise I can't get rid of, please ignore it. I'm very sorry, but I don't have any other time to record this episode. But let's return to Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Season 1, Episode 2, which is titled, I Become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. These chapter titles are all so iconic, but I think this is one of the most iconic ones. I used to do cross-stitching, so if I visit my parents and find like my stash of cross-stitch supplies, maybe I will do like one of those things you hang into your bathroom with this written on it, because I've seen a lot of those online. I'm like, they look so nice, and it's like really cute. The episode is 43 minutes long, give or take a few seconds, depending on how you watch it. There's like the translation ads at the back. Oh, I'm also going to have to say something about the translation, but I'm gonna keep that until later. We start out with Percy in an infirmary bed with like shrouds hanging from the ceiling. It looks like one of those princess beds, but in dark and gloomy. And it's the night. There's still a thunderstorm going on. And there's this girl. We now know it's Annabeth. And she says the iconic line, "You drool when you sleep." I love this line. Also, one of the, I'd say, nitpicky things I don't like, which I already mentioned are like really, really few. The delivery of this line was not how I imagined it, but how she did it was perfect for Annabeth, because I always think it's like quippy and fun, but the more I think about it, Annabeth is not the quippy and fun girl, she's the serious wise girl, so Percy does drool when he sleeps. And then Percy drifts off again, and when he wakes up the second time, Grover is there and all those shrouds are gone. On a table in the same room, there we see the Minotaur horn, which is bigger than I expected. It's basically half Percy's size, and growing up on a farm, bull horns are normally not that big, except for some breeds, but usually they're not that big. And Percy's like, so it really happened? Grover is very sorry about everything. But Percy doesn't want to talk to Grover because remember, he threw Percy under the bus. He got him expelled, even if it was for a good reason. Percy still is like in shock and doesn't process that this way, and he doesn't have the critical thinking skills to comprehend that. And Grover mentions, that his job was getting Percy to camp and that his job is basically done. And Percy is like, your job is done, you can leave me alone now. And he's off on his way to find his father at camp. And the next scene, we meet Mr. D. Percy's like, I need to talk to whoever's in charge. My name is Percy Jackson. And this is when Mr. D, iconic, yells, "Peter Johnson is here!" And then we find out through like a little talk between Percy, Grover, and Mr. D that the D stands for Dionysus, as in the god Dionysus, as in the god of wine and madness and also theater, which kind of makes sense. And then Percy addresses Dionysus as Your Highness, which is like, yes, that's how you talk to a god, especially Mr. D. And he asks Mr. D to help him find his dad. Turns out Mr. D is Percy's father. At least that's what he tells him. And he tries to get Percy to bring him wine, where Percy's like, he just won't have it. Like, that's all you gotta say to me? You want me to bring you a freaking bottle of wine? And he's like, then we can talk about whatever you want. You, me. Then when Percy is just on his way to actually probably get the wine, in comes a centaur. The centaur we see in one of the last frames of the last episode. And who would have thought? The centaur is Mr. Brunner, aka Chiron, camp activities director, trainer of heroes, and not comfortable with Grover praising him so much. And we also have this freaking awkward silence just after Chiron walks in and before they start talking. It's like a 5-second silence where everyone is just staring at each other and Percy's so confused. I mean, I would be too. And then Percy, the sassy guy that he is, just accepts it. He's like, you're a horse. Of course. Makes total sense. Chiron explains that Mr. D is not Percy's father and that he just wanted to trick him because he himself cannot get wine since he was forbidden to by Zeus himself. And Dionysus is like, why must you ruin everything? And here we have like this insight that these two have this kind of friendship where you nag on each other, but you're happy to have each other as like a support system. And Chiron gives Percy a tour of the camp and tells Grover to stay behind. And Grover is really, really worried about it, that he gets left behind. And Dionysus kind of assures Grover that he get the boy to camp. His job is done. He can relax now. And Grover just feels bad, which shows us that Grover actually cares about Percy and didn't just do it because it is his job. On our tour of camp, we find out that camp is huge. We see a bit of the arena, the training grounds, the strawberry fields, and Percy tells Chiron that he lost a sword. And Chiron just smirks and like, check your pocket. And he's like, no, I lost it. And Chiron just insists on Percy checking his pocket. And when he does, surprise, it is here. And here we get the explanation that these magical items always reappear to them. Then they get into like this little woody area with 12 cabins. And Chiron explains that these are the home of the children of the gods. 12 cabins for the 12 Olympian gods. And in each cabin only the kids of that god live. And Percy is not claimed, so he technically doesn't have a cabin dedicated to him/his godly parent. And Percy's like, why did you bring me here if I can't stay here anywhere? This is when Chiron explains that there is cabin 11, the Hermes cabin. And since Hermes is the god of travelers, not only his own kids stay in that cabin, but also the unclaimed ones. This is also one of the better shots we get of Chiron as a whole, where we see that one of his back legs has a brace, which is a representation of disabilities, which we will actually get more as the series goes on, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now. And Chiron also introduces Percy to the other campus, which are like not impressed, and Chiron leaves Percy alone. Yay. This is where we see that there is a mat on the floor laid out for Percy, since all the other beds are already taken up and Hermes' cabin is quite crowded. On the mat there is a bag with his stuff, and the first thing he does is he pulls out the blue candy he got from Sally. Then we meet another camper. His name is Luke, and he wanted to tell Percy how sorry he feels for him. And although Percy is defensive at first, he accepts the handshake and kind of has made a new friend. Then we cut to Grover, who's walking alone into the woods, which in itself shouldn't be like a red flag, since Grover is a satyr, so nature is like in his blood. There we meet a dryad. So this is totally new, never happened in the books, because the books are from Percy's perspective. Of course it could have happened, since Grover and Percy are not with each other 24/7 at that period. We meet this dryad. We know her name is Helena, not only because it's later revealed in the credits, but also I mentioned it in one of the news parts I did in the last 2 episodes. It's where Tish Monaghan talked about making this costume, and I had no idea what I was going to expect. I thought it was like elvish with like a long flowy dress, but this looks so good. It looks so realistic, and she like comes out of the tree. Yeah, she looks so good, and she's like a mother figure. I don't know if it is Grover's mother. She is at least a mother figure to Grover, and she's like looking at his horns and like he's picking at him, and he shouldn't be so hard on himself. And then the two go into like this kind of tunnel to the Council of Cloven Elders. We only see them brief. We don't get to see the conversation they have with them, so maybe we'll get a flashback in a later episode. That would be so cool. But the next shot is Grover coming into Chiron and Mr. D playing cards, and Grover says he talked to the council about Sally disappearing, because he said something along the line, he never seen a mortal get killed by a minotaur, but he would have thought it would be more squishy like a ripe banana. Like, interesting comparison. And that the council told him about that if a mortal is close to death, Hades could claim them for him, which is his theory happened. And Chiron and Mr. D don't shut him down, so it is probably what happened. So Sally's not dead. Yay! Sally! We love her. But they don't want Grover to tell this to Percy and make him like promise that he won't tell it. Then we get another Percy dream. This time he's not on the beach, he's in a desert, having this little campfire in front of him, and we get the light again from one of the other dunes, and this time the voice says, he left you here, left you with nothing. I know how I feel. You want what has been taken from you. You want justice. And then like the ground crumbles away, and Percy wakes up. And here we see, because it's already light and Luke and some other demigods were nearby, tell him that all demigods have those nightmares, and they also have like daydreams and ADHD and dyslexia. This is all because demigods process the world differently than humans. And for the first time, Percy here is like everyone else. We learn that Luke is the son of Hermes, but that doesn't matter because they're like all in the same boat, he says. We also meet another camper. He is not officially named during the scenes, but if you watch it with captions, it says Chris, and it's also in the credits. His name is Chris. And I think this is the only camper we get, like who we also name from the books, apart from Luke and Clarice we meet later, and of course the main trio. But we move on. They tell Percy about what camp has to offer, mostly glory, and it's called Kleos. It makes you kind of more important, attaches it to your name, and like prevents people from messing with you. And in that moment we meet Clarice. She tries to scare Percy, and then Luke explains that that's just the Ares kids, and Percy is like wondering why they're not messing with Luke, and Chris is like, because he's the strongest swordsman at camp. This is when Percy has an idea that if he makes a name for himself, the gods can't ignore him, and kind of wants to force his dad to claim him, where Luke is like, you can't force the gods to do anything. And then they were like, yeah, okay, but we first need to find out where you're good at. And this is when Percy says, where do we start? I thought we would get like a montage of a lot of different things. We only get 2 different things. The first one is archery, where we get demonstrated by this Apollo camper. She's in a wheelchair, and she's like firing this flaming arrow into a dummy Hydra. And then Percy has to try, and he's like, okay, yes, just so you know, I've never done anything like this before. This could go terribly wrong. Surprise, surprise, it does. He almost shoots his fellow campers, and at least he didn't like light it on fire as well. He was like, better not light it on fire. And he was right. The next thing that they try is the forges. There was this one guy who was like forging something, looked like a sword. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess it's a Hephaestus kid. And then Percy wants to try to take over and also like hits this glowing metal with the hammer 2 times. On a second time, it breaks off and falls into a pile of something, and that starts to burn. So nope, Percy's also not good at forging things. Then we go to lunch. There we learn about burnt offerings to the gods, and that when you burn what you'll miss the most, they're more likely to listen. This sparks an idea in Percy, and in the night he like sneaks out to the woods and has this little can and makes a fire in a can because he's responsible and doesn't want to start a forest fire. And then he burns some of his blue candy, I think it's blue jelly beans, to talk to his mom. He's not burning an offering for a god, he's burning an offering for his mom, who is like his personal goddess. He's like treating it as a long distance call, telling her that he misses her and that he actually found friends here, which I think is it's so heartbreaking and so sweet at the same time. And after that, he tries to sneak back into the Hermes cabin, and in front of the cabin, he gets met by some Ares campers, Clarice and 2 of her siblings. He's like, oh, hey, funny meeting you here. And they won't have any of his fun. And they drag him into the toilets and want to like dunk his head in there because Clarice wants him to admit that he did not, in fact, slay a minotaur and that it was all made up. And Percy's like, no, it's real. And Clarice is like, won't have it, and orders her 2 siblings to dunk his head into the toilet. They try, but before Percy's face can even like get in there, the water disappears, and they were all confused. They kind of let Percy go, and in that moment, 3 like jets of water start out of the toilet. None of them hitting Percy. They're like going around his face and hitting the campers, drenching them in toilet water. The like 2 henchmen types ran away like immediately, and Clarice stands up, shakes off like water, growls, and also runs. And Percy is so confused, stands up. The water broke the door and the hinges and like surrounding stalls as well, and he's like staring around, wondering what just happened. And then he looks at the entrance of the toilets, like the building where they're in, and sees a girl standing there like leaning on the side, and it's Annabeth. He's like, I can explain. She just says, no, you can't. And this is when Percy's like, realizes, hey, I know you. And she's like, no, you don't. Which is true. Percy's asking her, who are you? She just answers quick to the point, I'm Annabeth. And then he's like, Annabeth, are you stalking me? And she just blatantly says, yes, I guess. I'm not just reciting this whole dialogue. Yeah, probably, but I love it because it's the first real dialogue the 2 of them have. The next he answers is, why are you stalking me? And she just answers, I wanted to see if something like this would happen and see if you can help me. Help me with what? Asks Percy. And her answer is simple, win, capture the flag. And that's when we cut to the next day. Luke explains to Percy that Annabeth is a head counselor of the Athena cabin and led their blue team to 3 straight wins, and they're aiming for the 4th today. And that she's always 6 steps ahead of everyone. And Percy is asking Luke on which side he is, and Luke just says straight out, oh, always on hers, because she's his little sister. Rightfully so, Percy is confused. Like, Hermes, Athena, sister, what? Then we get the backstory of how Luke and Annabeth got to camp. Luke was traveling around the country with another girl, Talia, who is a forbidden kid. A forbidden kid is a kid of the big 3, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, which, like the name suggests, are forbidden because they are too powerful. One day they met this demigod kid, and that was Annabeth. They were worried about dragging her into this world, but when they saw her fight, the worries kind of went away. And on their way to camp, Talia didn't make it, just Luke and Annabeth did. And Luke also tells Percy why Annabeth is watching him so closely. It is because Annabeth was promised to go on a like really important quest, and this is why she's always watching the new arrivals to see if they are the ones that will get this really important quest where she can join. And then capture the flag starts. We get a few ground rules, magical items are allowed, no maiming, and then we get this little quip from Annabeth towards Luke. Do they feel like a winning candidate to you? I love that this 12-year-old is just commanding her own personal army. Luke being, 19? He's either 16 or 19 during this time. And Annabeth is just being 12 and commanding everyone. Like, this is authority. She knows what she's doing. She's great. Luke is taking his part of the team to in one direction, and Annabeth specifically requests that Percy joins her and calls him Sunshine. Annabeth and Percy are like on the way to another part of the woods, and when Percy trips and is like, yeah, thanks for asking, I'm okay. And we have this, Percy is talking and wanting to justify that he has to look good today for his dad, that he will claim him, and Annabeth is just like, she doesn't actually say much at all, if anything, so she's just walking beside him and always saying, what is this guy? What does he want? And why is he talking so much, basically? But she's also like calculating her plan. You can see it in her eyes that she is like Luke said, 6 steps ahead of everyone. Then they stop and she sees like Percy's armor is not like properly. She sets it. It's like just one strap. She puts the flap of the strap through this thing. I don't know what it's called, but if you see it, you know what I mean. And then we hear this sound. It's a conch horn, I think it's called, which means that the game itself is started. She leaves Percy like right where they were. It's like this little ridge overseeing a part of the forest, and goes. But before she goes, she puts on a cap which doesn't really fit with the armor, but as soon as she puts the cap on, she turns invisible, which really confuses Percy. He's like, what the heck is going on? Then Annabeth explains that it was a gift from her mom, and it turns her invisible. So she goes invisible again and goes somewhere else, and leaves Percy alone. We get a shot of other campers fighting. It's like the part that went with Luke, getting a few prisoners in the game. And then we cut back to Percy, just doing shit because nothing is happening. No one is there. He's doing the floss Fortnite dance, and he does random stuff. One of the shots is like him petting this kind of salamander, I guess. And then he just lays on this log, chilling, when he gets ambushed by a few Ares campers, one of them being Clarice. And she also has one of my favorite lines after Percy tells her, like, no maiming. Actually, she has 2 cool lines. One of them being, glory is fine, but revenge is better. And then I was like, you're not a child of Nemesis, but okay. And the other one is after Percy tells her no maiming. She's like, oh, guess I'll lose my dessert privileges for a while. I'll live. And then she has her awesome electric spear. And we get a fight scene between like Percy versus 3 Ares campers. I mean, it's predominantly Clarice, but there are also others. After he gets like away a bit, he runs and runs, but gets cornered and pushed like onto the beach, which is like not a sandy beach, it's more of has like stones, where they fight like again and again. And Percy has really good reflexes for a kid who's like been there 2 days. And during this battle, he manages to snap Clarice's spear in half. Oh, and she won't have it at all. She screams and runs up to him, grabs him by his armor and pulls him up because she's a bit taller than him. She's also older, but still. But the moment she wants to do something to him, this horn blows again, signaling that the blue team won, and they're like all running towards the beach with the red team's flag in the hand and celebrating. And then Clarice lets Percy just fall on the stones. This is also where Annabeth makes herself visible again because she was here all along watching. And Percy is really mad at it because why didn't she help? Speaking of help, she helps him up and Percy is still mad at her and she's like, oh, this guy, and says Percy, I'm sorry, and pushes him into the water, which makes him even angrier, asking her what is wrong with you. But in that moment, they notice that his cuts and bruises he sustained during the fight are starting to heal, fast. And Percy again is very confused. Fair. And above his head, a 6-foot trident appears, signaling him being claimed by Poseidon, god of the seas, earth shaker, father of horses. The last part was not said in the series, but in the books. I'm kind of mad because that they didn't say it in the books, because the part Father of Horses is just like, what does that mean? We hear, this is like Chiron saying it in the background, and we hear him talking about Percy being singular among demigods, which is so similar to something Sally said earlier in the first episode before the Minotaur fight. We see Percy moving into the Poseidon cabin, which is like empty, looks kind of dusty. There were whale skeletons like hanging from the roof, which is kind of creepy, kind of cool, and it's like so big, and this small child alone in this huge cabin. And then we hear Chiron explaining it further, and then we cut back to them like when this is actually happening. Chiron and Mr. D explaining to Percy that Zeus's master bolt was stolen, and Percy is being blamed because he's a forbidden child, and Zeus and Poseidon never get along. And if the master bolt is not returned until the summer solstice, which is in 1 week, there will be war, which means we have a quest. We have a timeline. And Percy's still like, but I didn't steal it. Chiron and Mr. D are like, yeah, we know. But there is a third brother, which means we know where we're going. We're going to the underworld. We're going to see Hades. They're explaining to Percy that a quest always has to have 3 people. And this is when Percy snaps. He's like, I have been ignored by my father for this long. Why does he think I would help him? And Mr. D is also getting angry, saying, you're his son, it's your duty. And Percy, taking no shit, snaps back, I am Sally Jackson's son. Mr. D is like confused. He's like, who is this? And Percy just says, she is the one who cared enough to call herself my mother. She got herself killed to protect me. And then suddenly Grover walks in. Sorry guys for interrupting. The grown-ups are like, Grover, not a good time. What are you doing? And Grover just bursts out. Sally Jackson is alive. Mr. D, clearly getting angry, is like, Grover. Grover explains to Percy what he learned from the Cloven Antlers, that it just looked like she died and Hades stole her, and which means if he goes to the underworld, Percy can find Sally and bring her back. And this is also where the others want him to go. So this is where Percy makes his decision and ends this episode with saying, when do we leave? We get our credits again. They're the same as before, so I don't think the credits will like change in each episode. But we get another sneak peek, and I will talk about a few of those shots because we have to wait. I mean, when this episode comes out, it's in 1.5 days, probably, not 2 days. So the sneak peek for next episode is we see Luke giving Percy flying shoes, the trio leaving camp, and them in a taxi or car heading into the city, and also a bus. And we see Mrs. Dodds again. What could that mean? Uh-oh. And we also get a sneak peek on the big bad of the next episode, Medusa. And I'm super excited, not only because of the story, but because I love Jessica Parker Kennedy. So this is the what is what of this episode. Now, let's see what of my previous prediction I made last week I got right. For the first episode, I predicted the following things. We go to the Met, check. We go to Yancey Academy, check. We meet Gabe, check. We go to Montauk, check. We have a deep talk with Sally, check. The Minotaur fight, also check. Then things where I'm not that certain, like where I was not that certain, was we get more of small Percy and his childhood in like flashbacks, which is check, but I heard there will be more in the future, so yay. And the one thing I didn't really get right, like it's a meh, is like Sally and Poseidon backstory in flashback. We got a bit of a backstory when Sally explained it to Percy, but not really a flashback, so I'm marking this as meh. And something I did not get right was we get more school life. We actually got less school life than in the books. Then, for episode 2, I actually got everything right, but I didn't really predict much new things. Percy wakes up at camp, meets Annabeth and Luke. Luke helps him figure out what he's good at. We meet Clarice with the bathroom incident, and capture the flag and the claiming, which means I got all of those things right. So, here are a few of my predictions for upcoming things. For the series in general, I think we will get an Athena reveal. I know it's never been teased as we have no actress cast, but since we have Athena in the credits, she's depicted there, and she's the only one we have not confirmed as appearing in this season, that has to mean something. So my theory is we will see Athena in this season. And there is also somewhere we have an owl. I think it's in the part with Ares and the motorbike. I'm talking about the credits. So if we get an Athena reveal, it's either in the last episode or in episode 5, I think it's when we meet Ares. Then, prediction for exactly the next episode is we meet the Oracle, we get the formal quest and the prophecy. We also meet the Fates because we haven't met them yet, and like book-wise we would have met them. We have the return of Mrs. Dodd since we saw her on the bus, and we will get Medusa also because next episode is the Medusa episode, so yeah. I also noted down a few Easter eggs I picked up on. I mostly talked about them during the last part, but I wanted to comprise them. If you have found more Easter eggs, please tell me online. I love Easter eggs. The first one was Blackjack. And then we have Rick in the scene where Percy gets expelled. I already talked about this. And the sandwich place being called D'Angelo's. And that's, I think, all the Easter eggs I picked up on. Most of them were from episode 1. Like I said, please tell me if you have more of them. I am always happy to hear them. And I also have a few more thoughts and feelings for the first 2 episodes in general. Some of them I haven't brought into the things what I said earlier yet. We started very dark and gloomy, but as soon as Percy meets Grover, everything gets more colorful. Grover brings magic into Percy's life, brings the mythology into his life. I love the symbolism. As a person who does not have a tattoo, but is constantly thinking, if I had one, what would it be? But too scared to get actually one. There are so many things inspired, a lot of quotes inspired by these 2 episodes that would make great tattoos, especially the line from Sally, the hold fast line. I love it. I also love the CGI. I have no idea how to do anything CGI related, and I'm amazed by the most littlest things, but I personally think, especially the monsters we have, they look so amazing. The music in general is also so good. It's spine-tingling. I wish we had a few more songs. We had this one Olivia Rodrigo song. I would like more songs in there. The actors are all great. I love them. If anyone was skeptical before, rest assured, it's perfect. And I know there was a lot of information dump in the first 2 episodes, but if you compare it to what they covered in these first 2 episodes to the book, in these first 2 episodes they covered 9 or 10 chapters, almost 100 pages, or even more. I don't have my book with me right now, so I can check. In just 2 episodes, it means we get a lot more exposition on these topics in the future episodes. We're gonna get flashbacks, we're gonna get more world building, but not that much at once. I already talked about Gabe and why is he funny. I love the actor, I love the delivery of it. I want to hate him more than I already hate him, so why is he funny? And speaking of Gabe, let's go to Sally, because the only good thing about this partnership is Sally. Like I said throughout this whole episode, Sally is just the best. We love her, and we must save her. And I love that she doesn't take shit from anyone. And Grover is just, he's happy, he makes me happy. In one of the interviews I mentioned during the news part, Arian said that Grover is the soul of the trio, and I wholeheartedly agree with this. He brings just so much feeling to everything. We're gonna move on with the trivia trials for today. Let's see how you answered the last 2 questions. The first question was, since Arian is playing a satyr, which is half goat, he's often referred to as the goat. What does goat mean in this context? GOAT stands for greatest of all time, which, after we saw these first 2 episodes, yes, he is the greatest of all time. And the second question was, what is the name of the cover artist that sings Riptide in the trailer? The original song is by Vance Joy, and the cover is from Stealth. I hope we will get it on Spotify soon, or at all. As soon as we get it, will be featured in our music playlist. Now for the questions of today. The first question was actually asked to the cast in one of the interviews, and I was like, oh, I like this question. It is, name the 12 cabins of Camp Half-Blood in order. And the second question is regarding to one of the actors, and it's, who plays Small Percy? you can answer the questions until next week. If you want, you can DM me your answers on Instagram at Delphi_Dispatches_pod, and I will reveal the answers next week. And for our last segment, it is one of my favorites, as always, mythical music. And since we don't have the Stealth Riptide cover on Spotify, I'm suggesting we put on our playlist Olivia Rodrigo, Logical, because it was featured in the first episode and I really like this song. That concludes another adventure with Delphi Dispatches. Thank you, demigods, for joining me on today's quest. Please consider subscribing to the podcast, and if you want to connect with me on Instagram, just follow at Delphi_Dispatches_pod for updates and a fun community. This is Martina, signing off until next time, and remember, the real world is where the monsters are.